There once lived a farmer named Marcus in a small village where everyone knew everyone else's business. Marcus was known for one thing: his terrible past. He'd made mistakes that haunted him daily. Failed businesses, broken relationships, and poor choices followed him like shadows. Every morning, Marcus would wake up and feel the weight of his past pressing down on his chest. The villagers would whisper when he passed by. "There goes Marcus," they'd say. "Remember what he did 5 years ago?" Or, "Poor fellow, he'll never amount to anything after those failures." Marcus carried these whispers like stones in his pockets. Each day felt heavier than the last. He tried to change, tried to start fresh, but everywhere he went, his past seemed to follow him. It was like trying to run away from his own reflection. One particularly difficult morning, after another sleepless night filled with regret, Marcus decided he'd had enough. He grabbed a shovel from his shed and walked to the old oak tree at the edge of his property. This tree had stood there for over 100 years, watching generations come and go. Under this mighty oak, Marcus began to dig. As he dug deeper, he started talking to himself, or maybe to the tree, or maybe to the universe itself. "You know what?" he said, throwing dirt over his shoulder. "I'm tired of carrying all this around. I'm tired of being defined by what I did wrong 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago." He dug deeper, sweat dripping from his forehead. "I made mistakes. Yes, I did. I hurt people. I failed. I disappointed myself and others. But I'm not the same person I was back then. I've learned. I've grown. I've changed." The hole was getting deeper now. Marcus's hands were blistered, but he kept digging. "Every day, I wake up and people see the old Marcus. They see the man who failed, who made poor choices, who wasn't good enough. But they don't see who I am today. They don't see how hard I've worked to become better." As the sun reached its peak, Marcus had dug a hole 3 feet deep. He sat on the edge, looking down into the earth he'd moved with his own hands. Then he did something that would change his life forever. Marcus went back to his house and gathered up everything that reminded him of his past failures. Old business documents from his failed ventures, photos from relationships that had ended badly, letters of rejection, bills from debts he'd accumulated during his darkest days, even a small notebook where he'd written down every mistake he'd ever made. He carried all of these items to the oak tree and placed them in the hole he'd dug. But before he covered them up, he said something profound. "I'm not burying you to forget you. I'm burying you to honor what you've taught me. Every failure taught me resilience. Every mistake taught me wisdom. Every rejection taught me perseverance. You are part of my story, but you are not my whole story." Then he began to fill the hole back up. With each shovelful of dirt, he spoke. "I bury the shame that has held me back. Shovel. I bury the fear of trying again. Shovel. I bury the voice that tells me I'm not good enough. Shovel. I bury the need for everyone's approval. Shovel." When the hole was completely filled, Marcus stood up, looked at the tree, and made a promise. "From today forward, I will not let my past define my future. I will not let other people's opinions of who I was stop me from becoming who I'm meant to be." Something remarkable happened after that day. Marcus didn't suddenly become a different person overnight. That's not how life works. But he started acting differently. When people whispered about his past, he didn't shrink away. Instead, he held his head high and continued with his day. When someone brought up his old failures, he would say, "Yes, I made those mistakes, They taught me valuable lessons, but that's not who I am today. The first real test came when Marcus decided to start a new business, a small organic farm. The bank manager, Mr. Henderson, knew about Marcus's previous business failures. "Marcus," Mr. Henderson said, looking uncomfortable, "you know I have to consider your history when reviewing this loan application." The old Marcus would have apologized, made excuses, or maybe even given up. But this Marcus looked Mr. Henderson straight in the eye and said, "You're absolutely right to consider my history. My previous failures taught me exactly what not to do. They gave me experience that someone who's never failed doesn't have. I'm not the same person who made those mistakes, and I can prove it." He presented a detailed business plan showing how he'd learned from each previous failure. He had backup plans, financial safeguards, and a clear vision. Mr. Henderson was impressed by this new confidence and approved the loan. Marcus's farm started small, but it grew steadily. He applied every lesson he'd learned from his past failures. When challenges arose, and they did, he didn't panic. He remembered what he'd learned from previous difficulties and found solutions. The villagers began to notice the change in Marcus. Mrs. Chen, who owned the local grocery store, approached him one day. "Marcus," she said, "I've been watching you these past months. You seem different, more confident. What changed?" Marcus smiled and looked toward the old oak tree in the distance. "I finally stopped letting my past control my present. I learned that my mistakes don't define me. How I respond to them does." Word spread about Marcus's transformation, and something beautiful began to happen. Other people in the village who were struggling with their own past mistakes started coming to him for advice. Sarah, a young woman who dropped out of college and felt like a failure, visited Marcus's farm one evening. "I don't know how to move forward," she said, tears in her eyes. "Everyone keeps reminding me of how I quit school, how I wasted my parents' money. I feel stuck." Marcus listened patiently, then walked her over to the oak tree. "You see this tree?" he asked. "It's been here for over 100 years. It's weathered storms, droughts, and harsh winters. Each challenge made it stronger, deeper roots, thicker bark. Your past challenges aren't meant to break you. They're meant to strengthen you." He told her about the day he buried his past under this tree, not to forget it, but to honor the lessons it taught him while refusing to let it control his future. "The question isn't whether you made mistakes," he said. "The question is, what are you going to do with what you've learned?" Sarah left that day with a new perspective. She enrolled in a different program, one that actually excited her, and went on to become a successful landscape architect. Marcus's story spread beyond the village. People from neighboring towns would come to hear the farmer who had buried his past and transformed his life. But Marcus never presented himself as a guru or someone who had all the answers. "I'm just a farmer," he would say. "I plant seeds, I tend to them, and I wait for them to grow. I learned to treat my life the same way. I planted new seeds of thinking. I tended to them daily, and I waited patiently for them to grow into something beautiful." One day, a successful businessman named David drove all the way from the city to meet Marcus. David had heard about the farmer's story and was curious. "I don't understand," David said. "I've never failed at anything major in my life. I've been successful in business, I have a good family, money in the bank, but I feel empty inside. I feel like I'm not really living, just existing. What's wrong with me?" Marcus smiled knowingly. "You've never failed because you've never really tried anything that mattered to you. You've played it safe. Sometimes the people who seem to have it all together are actually the most stuck. Because they're afraid to risk what they have for what they could become. David was quiet for a long moment. So what do I do? You don't need to bury your past like I did, Marcus said. You need to dig up your dreams. What did you want to do before you decided to play it safe? What would you attempt if you weren't afraid of failing? That conversation changed David's life. He left his corporate job and started a nonprofit organization that provided clean water to rural communities. He faced many challenges and even some failures, but he was finally alive in a way he'd never been before. Years passed, and Marcus's farm became more than just a place where vegetables grew. It became a symbol of second chances and new beginnings. The oak tree where he'd buried his past became a place where people would come to reflect on their own lives. Marcus would often find people sitting under the tree, and he'd join them. He never pushed advice on anyone, but he was always ready to share his story if someone wanted to hear it. One autumn evening, a young man named Jake arrived at the farm. He'd heard about Marcus from a friend and was desperate for guidance. "I've made so many mistakes," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've hurt people I care about. I've wasted opportunities. I've let everyone down, including myself. How do I even begin to start over?" Marcus looked at the young man with compassion. He remembered feeling exactly the same way. "The first step," Marcus said gently, "is to forgive yourself. Not because what you did was okay, but because carrying shame and guilt won't undo the past. It will only prevent you from creating a better future." They walked together to the oak tree, now massive and strong. "You know what I learned?" Marcus continued. "The past is like soil. You can let it poison everything you try to grow, or you can use it as fertilizer for something beautiful. The choice is yours." Jake spent the night under the stars, thinking about Marcus's words. The next morning, he helped Marcus tend to the farm, and for the first time in years, he felt hope. Marcus's transformation wasn't just about burying the past. It was about planting seeds for the future. Every day, he chose to water those seeds with positive actions, kind words, and the determination to be better than he was the day before. The village that once whispered about Marcus's failures now spoke of his wisdom. Children would visit the farm to learn about growing vegetables, but they also learned about growing as people. Marcus would tell them, every seed has to be buried in darkness before it can grow toward the light. Sometimes, being buried isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of your growth. As Marcus grew older, he never forgot the lessons that his past had taught him. He would often say, "I'm grateful for my mistakes, not because they were pleasant, but because they led me to who I am today. Without them, I would never have developed the strength, compassion, and wisdom that define me now." The oak tree grew taller and stronger with each passing year, its roots deeper than ever. Just like Marcus, it had weathered many storms and emerged more beautiful because of them. When people ask Marcus about the secret to his transformation, he always points to the oak tree and says, "The secret isn't in burying your past and forgetting it. The secret is in learning from it, honoring what it taught you, and then refusing to let it control your future. Your past is not your prison, it's your teacher." Marcus's story reminds us that we all have the power to rewrite our story, not by erasing the difficult chapters, but by choosing how we want the next chapter to unfold. The farmer who buried his past beneath a tree discovered that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not to run from your mistakes, but to transform them into wisdom. And that oak tree, it still stands today, a testament to the power of growth, the strength that comes from deep roots, and the beauty that emerges when we choose to reach toward the light, no matter how dark our beginnings might have been. Remember, your past mistakes don't define your future possibilities.